Thank you to this episode's sponsor, Tommy John. Get 20% off your first purchase at TommyJohn.com/EDH right now for Valentine's Day. Hurry to TommyJohn.com/EDH for 20% off. TommyJohn.com/EDH. See site for details. Hello and welcome to the EDHRECast. My name is Joey Schultz and I'm joined, as always, by my fantastic co-hosts. Up first, he hopes that if they ever make a magic movie, it's called Magic Mike's The Gathering. It's Matt Morgan.
So the old owners of my house, I guess they used to have a hen house, and late at night you can still hear clucking from the backyard. I think it might be a poultrygeist.
A poultrygeist? No.
Sorry for the bad joke. Sorry.
Oh no, Matt, I think it was excellent. Absolutely excellent.
Ooh, well played, sir. I'm just gonna give you some shell for trying to steal my thunder.
I think that this might be one of those weeks where I did better at the dad joking than you did, Matt.
You beat the one that I was trying to think of, so.
Yeah, I don't know what the clock you're all talking about.
Never mind.
There it is.
He wins it. Yeah, okay. And that right there is our next co-host. Let me introduce him. Up next here, he knows that Phyrexians want everything to be all will be one, but he'll defeat them by reminding them that one is the loneliest number. That's Dana Roach.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and there's really only one thing in Magic I can't deal with, and that's a deck of cards glued together.
You can't deal.
What?
A certified dad joke winner this week. Dana, well done. At least you won't ever have to play like 52 card pickup or anything like that. So that's
right.
good.
Yes, it solves that problem, I suppose.
You just play brick pickup.
There you go.
Yeah.
52 card brick up. All right, let's move ourselves along here. Ostensibly, I think this is supposed to be the EDHRECast, where we talk about, EDHREC. EDHREC is the best deck building resource on the web for the Commander format, compiling data from deck lists all over the internet to provide helpful recommendations for new Commander decks. And here on the podcast, what we'd like to do is give all of that data a little more context. Matt, do you mind telling us what it is we're talking about in this week's episode?
Well, this week we're going to talk about me. That's it. We're just going to talk. Well, okay, specifically, we're going to talk about one of my decks. Dana suggested talking about our own decks and deck building processes that we go through. And so today we're going to start off with my Raga Draga Gore-Guts Boss deck.
Yeah. We're hoping to do a little series of decks, not quite deck techs, because it isn't about the deck themselves necessarily, but the things that we've learned in brewing some of these, and especially the differences that our decks have between like what's in our lists and what's in the data on EDHREC, and what we can learn from differences like that hopefully give a lot of lessons to folks who are brewing up some of their own original lists. So Matt, it'll be really fun to get into, but we have to wait before we get to your fun deck building stuff, because we got some shout outs to do, dude.
First, I'd like to thank Chase, also known as Mana Curves, for their help in editing the show. You can find them on Twitter at Mana Curves.
We're ecstatic to tell you that EDHREC has also partnered with Coalesce Apparel and Design. Coalesce has an amazing line of Magic-inspired apparel, and if you've ever wanted EDHREC shirts or hoodies, you can now go browse the EDHREC collection. Head to Coalesce and use code EDHREC for 10% off your order. EDHREC also streams on Whatnot. Join our content manager Jason Alt on whatnot.com/invite/EDHREC. And if you sign up with that EDHREC membership code, you get $15 of credit for free. So for Whatnot and for Coalesce, that's code EDHREC.
And if you'd like to support the show, you can do so by liking and subscribing on YouTube. You can subscribe on your local podcast app, or you can go over to patreon.com/EDHRECast, where we have patron tiers of all sorts of levels. Whether you want to join the Discord community, you want to see everything a day early, there's all that and more over at patreon.com/EDHRECast, including our weekly patron shout out. So this week, we're going to give one to the most skateboarding radness Tony Hawk Pro Skater patron. That's going to be Ollie Arizola. So thank you, Ollie, for all of that. We definitely appreciate your support. And thank you for being so rad, as your name implies.
Ollie, thank you ever. So seriously, the Patreon support is so wonderful. And if you want to support us by leaving a review, subscribing, like Matt said, that's all wonderful. But our patrons really do mean the world to us as well. Okay, guys, let's get into it here. Matt, as you said, we're talking about you. And we're going to do a What was the phrase that you said you liked? More of a depth tech than a deck tech, to sort of get into the minutia about what it is that you like about this deck and the lessons you've learned from building it and stuff that sets it apart from other decks and things like that. And could you once again introduce us to your lovely commander that we'll be diving deep into this week?
Well, I guess the first thing I should do is actually read the card, because not everybody knows what Raga Draga is, even though he is the boss of the Gorguts, whatever that is supposed to mean. So Raga Draga is 2 red and a green for a legendary human boar, which is, I think this is the first time we've ever had a human boar, for a 4/4 that has all the abilities of each creature you control with a mana ability gets +2/+2. Whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it. And whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature, it gets +7/+7 and gains trample until end of turn. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of really cool things, but most importantly, the mana abilities. That's instantly what everybody kind of glammed onto as soon as Raga Draga was previewed. And oh boy, it's been a lot of fun.
So is that the thing that inspired you to like first build this commander? Because that's something I always find fascinating is what is the thing that makes that makes someone feel inspired to build a deck? Because it's oftentimes something like oddly personal, like or at least something that doesn't register with me. So somebody like, oh, this and this and this. I'm like, oh, that's not the reaction I got from that card. Whereas a reaction I'll have from something else doesn't inspire somebody else. So like, I'm curious why this jumped out at you, someone who doesn't actually even brew that much.
So first off, if you can make Birds of Paradise relevant in combat, I'm always going to be on board. That's kind of that was the instant idea was, oh my gosh, I can play Llanowar Elves and they're not going to be a total throwaway chump blocker. I can play Birds of Paradise. I can do all these things. So that was the level 0 thought process there. It was very easy. But then as soon as people started getting kind of their deck lists online, because I waited a couple weeks to kind of see what people were doing before I committed to an idea. Everybody was doing Elf Ball. And Elf Ball's been done a million times. It's one of the most popular creature types on EDHREC. And that's just not what I want to do. I want to brew a deck, but I also want to have a little bit of identity. And I think that's one thing I've said many times. Dana, you've rubbed off on me. You've given me a little bit of I search for hipster cred, I guess. But I wanted to find a way that I could build the deck, and it wasn't going to be like everybody else's, play as many elves as you can, Finale of Devastation, untap an elf,
sure,
blah, blah, blah. Like, that just wasn't a super fun idea to me. So I had to do a little bit of digging in order to find something that excited me to take the deck in a direction that was going to be fun for me to play that wasn't what everybody else was doing.
And what was that direction? He asks very leadingly, knowing exactly where this is going and how cool it is.
well, so backstory. I used to have a Gliss of the Trader deck, the same as Dana, and mine was, I wanted to be like Eldrazi Tribal, and I tried really hard, but it was just a bad deck. It was being torn in so many different directions, so I had a whole pile of all these Battle for Zendikar block Eldrazi laying around. They were all bad cards. They don't do anything by themselves. But then I was doing some digging, looking for just what is a cool creature with cool mana abilities. And I realized that Eldrazi Scions and Eldrazi Spawn, as in the tokens that you make from so many different Eldrazi creatures over the years, they have mana abilities because they have the ability you can sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless mana to your mana pool. So that does make it technically a mana ability, which means they benefit from Raga Draga's ability, where all your creatures with mana abilities get +2/+2. So that instantly got my wheels turning. So I got really excited because I finally get to play some of these cards that I've tried to make work, but never had a time for them to shine, and here it was.
What's especially weird about that, because that's a great inspiration and a great thing to, like, a connection to make a deck unique. But what's bizarre about that is almost at exactly the same time, we both had the same idea, like, oh, let's build a deck with
we did
with Eyeless Watcher and and Brood Monitor and Birthing Hulk, right. Something no one's ever said. And you and I said it at the same time in radically different decks.
Yeah, because you went yours in a Golgari direction, and Matt's like, no, I'm going to pump these up, and they're going to hit people.
Yeah, so strange. Like, neither of us had built an Eldrazi deck forever, and then we did it at the same time, using the worst possible Eldrazi.
Yeah, nobody's excited to play Kozilek's Predator. Nobody.
Right, yes.
If you are, something's wrong. But this was a chance for us to play those cards. And you're right. Baldur's Gate, which a set that all three of us were homers for, we're not shy about it, but it gave the same roughly theme of Eldrazi Scions and Spawns. You went Golgari, I went Gruul, but we still are using the same pile of bad cards to do it.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and I just want to kind of gush about some of the synergies here, because I think that like when people hear it, like they're kind of like, oh, okay, that sounds neat. But like, I want to like capture the vibe of what it's actually like to play against this dang Raga Draga deck, because like you play a Rapacious one, which makes spawns when it hits someone. So every time you hit someone with this trampling 5 thing, you dump out a bunch of 2/3s. Every time you hit you play a Brood Monitor, and you make 3 of the Eldrazi Scion tokens. So Brood Monitor is 6 mana for 4 3/3s suddenly on the battlefield. Or you cast a Skittering Invasion, and suddenly you have 5 actually potent bodies on the battlefield, and you get Raga Draga's 7 mana plus trigger. Like, this deck's actually amazingly brutal. Like, I flipping love what you're up to with this dang deck.
Well, thank you.
Because that pump is so significant. It just, you think of those things like, oh, the little dorky creatures, they don't matter that much. No, they do. They hurt. They are relevant in combat, and it's agonizing.
Well, and that was the fun challenge of the deck. So yes, giving all of them +2/+2, it made them not irrelevant, but it's also, it's kind of hard to win games with 2/3s and 3/3s sometimes. And so finding ways to make these otherwise very insignificant draft chaff, they're literally draft chaff.
Yeah, right.
A pile of these cards are all like 35 cents.
The definition of draft chaff.
Right.
So it's super cheap deck, but the challenge was trying to find a way to make all of it was very easy to make this army and clog up the board state, but how do I translate that into being relevant during combat? And so thankfully, there's a lot of really cool utility cards that I do get to play in this deck that make the spawns and the scions even better.
Well, and so, Matt, I did a quick comparison here from your deck against the average Raga Draga deck, and you have 66 cards that are unique to your version of the deck compared to the average,
I believe
which is really cool. And a lot of it comes down to, like, oh, the type of ramp spell that you're using might be like a growth spasm instead of something a little bit more predictable, because that one gives you a spawn that you can start, doing fun stuff with. But the thing that I especially like is how leaning into this theme isn't just because, oh, it sounds cool, but it actually opens up some very unique synergies that are really, really exciting. For example, you get to run more one-sided board wipes when a bunch of your creatures are colorless, and All Is Dust would leave your colorless creatures completely alone. Like, that is actually just super sick tech. I really like that. Or, since so many of these Eldrazi creatures that you're playing make those tokens on ETB, you've also opened yourself up to a Panharmonicon synergy if you want it. Like, it's little details like that actually make this sound not just novel, but like good and novel, like powerfully novel. And I think that's so wonderful.
Well, and there's also a lot of really cool synergies too that I kind of opened myself up to with. So Raga Draga gives all creatures with the mana abilities +2/+2. So if you animate a land, it still is a land and still has the tap or the mana abilities where you can tap it for mana. So cards like Llanowar Loam Speaker, a lot of people are kind of latched onto, but it's just such a powerhouse card that you find all these random creature lands that you can animate, and you just really are able to go over the top with some of these. And so it's super fun. And honestly, Forsaken Monument is an absolute beating of a card because lands are colorless. So if you animate a land, that also gets +2/+2 from Forsaken Monument.
Oh, what?
So there's so much just cool little things that I discovered in the process of, okay, like, what is a specific aspect of this that I can dial in on, and how can I apply it? And so, honestly, this deck, the idea and realizing what a mana ability is, it took a little bit of knowledge from the game, but it was rewarded because I knew just some random detail that didn't really matter. I opened myself up to this totally, what I hope is unique brew that I've just been having so much fun with.
Yeah, animating an Inkmoth Nexus, which becomes from a 1/1 infect flying artifact creature land, so does the mana ability, then it becomes a 3/3 from Raga Draga, and then you cast like a 7+ thing, and then Raga Draga gives it another +7, and suddenly you've like built your own Blightsteel Colossus here just from your stupid land. Dang it, dude, this deck is so like
I have done that. That has been a line of play that has happened in a game, and it comes out of nowhere too. It's super powerful. I just really enjoy playing it. And the mana requirements too. It's been really weird trying to figure out how to juggle, because a lot of these Eldrazi, they'll have colorless as part of the mana cost. Like, it has to be an actual colorless mana. It can't be generic mana. And so figuring out how can I play around the colorless requirements with my creature land. So Mutavault is getting played. Nobody plays Mishra's Factory, but it's fantastic here. So there's just a lot of really cool card choices that I get to make because I get to build around just random different synergies that have kind of built on each other throughout the entire building of this deck process.
No one plays Mishra's Factory. My Babala Saga deck over here, like, excuse me, I do play a Mishra's Factory. I love it too.
Weirdly enough, I have it in my equipment deck as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to go back to the Inkmoth Nexus, or I guess any of these creature lands, but the Nexus in particular, what's great about that kind of combo, not really a combo, I guess, but synergy, I guess I would call it, is it doesn't require you to do anything. You're not having to add in extra cards for there to be a kill condition. It's just a land that you're running in your deck. It's only 2 colors, so you don't necessarily need the fixing that badly anyway. You make a ton of mana because of how the deck works. So like you have a bunch of creatures that tap for mana, so you can afford utility lands.
Oh yeah.
And Inkmoth Nexus turning into a Blightsteel Colossus just requires you to do the things the deck was already doing, which is cast spells.
Right.
So you don't have to put any extra cards in the deck to make it work. You just, on occasion, find yourself in a position where, oh, you're going to die right now because of the cards that were already in the deck anyway. It took up 0 slots, basically, for you to have a thing that you'll stumble across once in a while that will kill somebody. And that is so efficient to find those things in decks and to put them in your decks where you just add in a way to remove somebody without actually having to add anything in.
Yeah, it's just been so fun to find so many different random cards that, okay, I'm already doing this. What else likes to do that? So cards like Viridian Joiner, it's a fine card. It gets played in like some +1/+1 counter deck, stuff like that. But here, it's just a free 3 mana dork. Right. It's just fantastic. Right. So it taps for 3 because Raga Draga gives it +2/+2. So just cards like that, just finding these random, they're not really hidden because they're available there, but just finding out what benefits more. And this is a deck too. We're not going to get Scions and Spawns very often.
Right.
So the deck doesn't have a chance to build on that. So finding other, like, just corner case things like Generator Servant. Who's playing Generator Servant? Not a whole lot of folks.
What is even a Generator Servant? What is that?
Exactly. There's like 8 other people in the world that are playing Generator Servant. So it's 1 in a red, and you can tap it and sacrifice Generator Servant, and it adds 2 colorless mana. And then if it's spent to cast a creature spell, it gains haste until end of turn.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
That's a mana ability.
It's a mana ability, but it helps cheat out my big things if I need them. It pays commander tax, gives Raga Draga haste if I need it. Like, there's a lot of cool things. And Joey, I know when we've streamed over at twitch.tv/EDHRECast, you've sat there and when I've cast a Rishkar Pima Renegade, and you're like,
yes,
what? Oh, because Rishkar gives +1/+1 counters, and if it has a counter on it, it has a mana ability all of a sudden. So giving Raga Draga his own buff,
yeah,
is great. It's fantastic.
Yeah. That one is beautiful. I think that one counts as my favorite move that you pull off in this deck. The Rishkar thing is just like it's just a chef's kiss moment. But I guess that makes me wonder though, for you, what is the coolest move in your opinion that you've ever pulled off in this deck?
So the coolest sequence I've ever pulled off, I would say, is, so like Dana hinted at, when you're playing Scions and Spawns and all that stuff, you have access to a ton of mana at any given time in the game. You just sacrifice all your Spawns, whatever, get colorless mana. So somebody cast a board wipe, and the board was very clogged up. So I sacrificed all my Scions to float a bunch of mana, and it was later on in the game, so everybody had a bunch of mana. So I cast a Vile Redeemer, which is such a random card, but I absolutely love it. So it's whenever you cast Vile Redeemer, you can pay a colorless, and if you do, put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield for each non-token creature that died under your control this turn. So that just right away just refills the board state if you had 5 or 6 creatures die. I love it. It's one of those great insurance cards. Somebody plays a board wipe, you cast this. It's kind of like some of the cards that, Joey, I know you like. They're when you get to draw cards for each creature that dies, those types of effects. So Vile Redeemer, I cast that at end of turn, and I had several mana still floating. So I also activated Spawning Bed, which is 6 and tap it. And you can sacrifice Spawning Bed. You put 3 1/1 Eldrazi Scions on the battlefield. So right off the bat, I reloaded before the turn was even over. And so then they passed the turn, that went over to me. So I untapped and I cast a Forsaken Monument, which is a fantastic card for just the format, where it gives all my colorless creatures +2/+2. So already I untap, I just cast one spell, and I think I won within a turn or two. It's just so great. There's a lot of flexibility there, and it was kind of a wild play because it went from board wipe, we're resetting the board, to not for me.
Yeah, and I like that especially because I think when people see this commander, they expect that your typical win condition will be elves, elves, elves into Craterhoof Behemoth, but instead you're going spawn, spawn, spawn into Forsaken Monument with a double buff off of Raga Draga. Have fun, guys. Like, and that's a way that is entertaining to lose to, which is really, really enjoyable. Like, people are going to remember that and be excited if you actually manage to stomp them, because what a unique way to go about it.
Well, you've been talking about a lot of cards, I think, that don't see much play in Raga Draga and probably should see a little bit more. So, like, you kind of been accidentally challenging with some stats. Maybe we should intentionally challenge some stats.
I agree. You may challenge some of the card choices here, but we should challenge all the stats first.
Listen, all that I want this year is for me to be able to do a segue just one time, you guys.
The real stat that we're challenging is Joey's authority to make a segue. That's what we're really challenging.
Oh, 2023, the year where I never get to introduce challenge the stats anymore. That's fine. We'll take a break and come back with some challenges. But after those challenges, we will get even more into the nitty gritty of your deck, Matt. So you'd better be prepared too.
That's fine with me. Let's go.
Is it weird to give your partner the gift of underwear? No. It's weird to give them the gift of bad underwear, though. If you're buying underwear for yourself or for someone else, you don't want it to be the equivalent of those, like, flimsy penny sleeves. You want good quality, and you can pamper your partner's or your own personal posterior with this episode's sponsor, Tommy John. Look, we're Magic players, so we love all those accessories like fun playmats, stylish deck boxes, and long-lasting card sleeves. And Tommy John's undergarments are also fun, stylish, and long-lasting. We treat our cards with such nice accessories that I think we deserve to treat ourselves to some nice things too. Tommy John has Valentine's Day designs. I personally think that their cool cotton brief is really classy, and like, I was just poking around the Tommy John website, and I might have to get my husband these really nice loungewear joggers. With over 20 million pairs sold, it's easy to see why Tommy John doesn't just have customers, they have fanatics. Get 20% off your first purchase at TommyJohn.com/EDH right now for Valentine's Day. Hurry to TommyJohn.com/EDH for 20% off. TommyJohn.com/EDH. See site for details.
The first card I'm going to challenge here is Myriad Landscape in Niv Mizzet Reborn decks. And the reason this has come up is I've had a friend that has a Niv Mizzet Reborn deck, and he's gotten burned by Myriad Landscape twice, once in each of the last 2 weeks playing at our shop. And it's in almost 20% of Niv Mizzet Reborn decks. The problem is Myriad Landscape forces you to go get 2 basic lands of the same type. So it doesn't really fix your mana, and Niv Mizzet requires you to have 1 of each color mana to even be cast in the first place. So he's found himself with a Myriad Landscape out needing 2 colors of mana and was only able to get 1, and it pushed back his ability to cast Niv several turns beyond what he wanted to do. Myriad Landscape is a pretty decent card, but I do think there's a lot of situations where people either don't realize that clause, because I've seen that clause missed, or they don't realize how much that can affect their deck. The fact that they're getting 2 lands on a land that comes into play tapped and requires mana to activate, but it's only kind of ramping you. It's not actually fixing any colors for the most part. So if you're playing Niv Mizzet Reborn or any 5-color commander, basically, be very, very cautious of Myriad Landscape. That card can actually hurt you more than it can help you, especially in a deck where you have access to green and you can just probably go get a land that has multiple land types and can do multiple things with a Nature's Lore or 3 visits or something. So Rear Landscape probably overplayed in Niv Mizzet Reborn and a lot of 5-color decks.
I really like the lands that find more lands, like Crows and Verge is a cycle that I wish they would finish. I want more Crows and Verge effects. I really like that. And those might suit you better. Like, I feel like we've all seen a 5-color deck where they literally have only one mountain, only one forest, only one of each basic, at which point Myriad Landscape wouldn't get you a whole lot of anything.
Sure, yeah.
I feel like we've all seen that. So yeah, I feel that one in a 5-color deck. Like, I really like Myriad Landscape for a mono or a 2-color deck, but in a 5-color deck, it feels like you're going to have severely diminished returns. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, I'm going to jump in then, and I'll go second so that Joey has to wait even longer to get to his challenge. So the card I'm going to challenge this week, there's a lot of really cool commanders that care about exiling cards these days. Faldorn, Dreadwolf, Herald, Lelia, the Blade Reforged, all sorts of different commanders that like having cards exiled. And that's Impulse Draw is probably one of the coolest and best developments for mono red card draw in a long time. And so a card that hasn't really caught on yet, granted it's been out for a couple months now, is Visions of Phyrexia. So it is 2 red for an enchantment that says, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn. And at the beginning of your end step, if you didn't play a card from exile this turn, create a tapped Power Stone token, which is you can tap it to add 1 colorless mana, and this mana can't be spent to cast a non-artifact spell. So it is a little limited in what you can use it for, but being able to access more cards and having a little bit of upside every turn, there's just so much going on there. We talk about how Frontier Siege Outpost Siege was the one that it was one of the only really red impulse draw effects that we had. And it was highly, highly played because options were so limited. Now that the options aren't so limited, we just have so many cool versions of these cards that have an upside that you're able to kind of work in and just benefit from, and you're getting card advantage all along the way. There are cards that we got like Valakut Exploration, which was a fantastic version of that too, where you get to play, if every time you play a land, exile the top card of your library, and then you can play that land at the beginning and then at the beginning of your end step, if there are cards exiled with Valakut Exploration, you put them into the graveyard, and that deals that much damage to each opponent. So these types of effects I just absolutely love. So Valakut Exploration is almost in 35,000 decks. And I think that's really a trajectory for a lot of decks that want to be playing these effects to pick up for Visions of Phyrexia. It's not near as powerful, but if you need one copy of that effect, you probably want another. And this is a fantastic version of that, especially if you are playing artifact-heavy decks. So if you want some more red impulse draw, if you care about lands or cards getting exiled from your library, Visions of Phyrexia is a fantastic addition. It's only played in 2,400 decks right now. Hopefully that changes because it's such a powerful effect, and you're not going to lose all the benefit from that because you do get those Power Stone tokens.
Well, Matt, now I finally will go to my challenge. No more waiting for me. But this is actually our listener submitted challenge, the stats of the week from one of our patrons. AJ Nixie has a very nifty challenge here for the commander Baloth Baratil Entertainer, which is that red, choose a background commander that goads all of your opponent's creatures that have less power than Baloth. Specifically, AJ is pointing out that the card Forbidden Orchard should see a lot more play in decks where Baloth is one of your commanders. Forbidden Orchard being that awesome land that can tap for any color, but you give a 1/1 to one of your opponents. This is a really cool card in like group hug decks. I've used it in my own Kineos and Tiro deck for similar, funny political shenanigans like that. But here in Baloth Baratil, you're just forcing your opponents to attack with all of the 1/1s that you're giving them, and you're fixing your own mana along the way. Like, these 1/1s will be used to attack your enemies. So this is fantastic. AJ says that they did a little bit of math and sees that only about 4% of decks that use Baloth and a background as the commanders, only about 4% of them are actually using Forbidden Orchard right now. So this is a very clever pick to take a look into. Forbidden Orchard, give your opponent stuff that you will then be goading with your commander. I'm super into this one. Thank you so much, AJ. And you know what? I think that also serves as a small transition back into our topic here, thinking of a land with creatures and stuff like that. And Matt, now I think it's time that we put the spotlight on you, that we start to scrutinize your deck even further, look really hardcore into the data and specifically some of the stuff that you're not playing. Like, we already know that you're not playing a lot of the mana dorks that would characterize an Elf Ball deck, for example. But there are a couple of other cards that I'm curious to know more why you're choosing to ignore them when so many other Raga Draga decks really love them. Specifically, cards that animate a bunch of lands. So for example, Sylvan Awakening will turn all of your lands into 2/2 creatures, and that would get a huge buff off of Raga Draga. Or there's the new card Awaken the Woods, which makes a bunch of Forest Dryad tokens, so that would get a huge buff from Raga Draga as well. So there are a couple of other land animators that I'm interested to see if those are things that you're considering upgrading into in the future, or if there's a reason that you've decided to avoid them.
Well, Awaken the Woods, I have thought about. I just haven't had a chance to get a copy, and it's like $25.
Sure, yeah.
It's more expensive than the rest of the deck almost, and so that's just a budget consideration right there. It's not that it's a bad card because I'm not a huge fan of permanent animation of lands. There are some cards that do that, and so Awaken the Woods would be fantastic because you're creating separate creature tokens that happen to also be lands. But if it was something that animated all my lands permanently and turned them into creatures, those are the effects I'm not a huge fan of. I prefer the until end of turn. That way board wipes don't ruin me. Sylvan Awakening is a good option. Honestly, that would probably be more considered for me personally, just price considerations. I don't want this to be a super expensive deck. I want it to be a creative and fun deck, but not a I'm buying wins type of deck. I want to be able to play with newer players, that type of thing. So Sylvan Awakening, yeah, I like it. It's a good for kind of that overrun type of turn. It's a consideration. I tended to focus the process, but I do have some cards too that they haven't really impressed me, or they were kind of placeholders until I could kind of fill out. So Sylvan Awakening and some of those reanimation, or some of those animation, I should say, they're good considerations, and I don't think anybody who does include them are wrong at all.
See, I was expecting that you were afraid of me playing an Aether Spouts on you whenever you attacked with all of your land creatures.
That too. So that is why, and I with all of my decks that I build, I prefer kind of the surgical tools that are kind of specific but very accurate with what they're doing versus I'm just going to take a hammer to it. So yes, I like taking hammers to my opponents with combat and everything. But as far as my answers and the tools, I like them to be specific and take care of certain scenarios that the deck might be weak to. And so, yeah, Aether Spouts is a totally real card. Settle the Wreckage, all those types of effects. They get around Sylvan Awakening, and I don't love opening myself up for a one-sided Armageddon. That's just not something that I like to do. So minimizing risk is something that was always in the back of my mind, no matter what deck it is.
Well, since we're talking about lands, the ones that jumped out at me, because I didn't know they were in the deck, because I've never seen you actually cast them either. There's a couple of targeted land removals in here, Thermokarst being one. What is the thought process behind those? Because I don't often see people running that kind of effect in these decks.
So Thermokarst and Molten Rain, honestly, those were placeholders until I found something better. But also, when we play, because we play with each other every single week, twitch.tv/EDHRECast.
Heyo.
The both of you run an exorbitant amount of utility lands.
You're not wrong.
Both of you, if there's black, there's Cabal Coffers, there's Urborg, there's all that stuff. And so to me, in the thought process of building this deck, having some sort of scalpel to surgically get rid of certain problem cards, that's never really a bad thing. It's absolutely a gotcha type of card. Nobody ever expects to see Thermokarst.
No, they don't.
Those were cards that they just happened to fit kind of okay, this is going to solve a problem because I don't really have a whole lot. But I don't play a whole lot of land destruction effects. I'm not like you, Dana, where I'm playing Ghost Quarter in every deck. I do have a Tectonic Edge.
Sure.
But I didn't have copies, and I happened to have copies of Molten Rain and Thermokarst.
Gotcha.
They're not the best cards. They're definitely on the chopping block. But when I first put the deck together and I thought of, okay, if I'm playing against Joey and Dana routinely, and then a couple of my other friends, they have a lot of utility lands that I don't want to stick around longer than they need to. So they were fine placeholders, but they're definitely not cards that I love having in the deck. If there was a better option, then I definitely would take advantage of that.
It's just so funny to see a 3-mana destroy target land effect in almost anything, but especially when it's an old bordered green vereen like Thermokarst.
Right.
It's just like, what?
But Joey, if it's a snow covered land, I get to gain a life, and that's just a great feat.
So worth it.
Well, in one thing, I guess we should note, and I guess it's fairly obvious from the fact that this is a Baldur's Gate commander, so the deck is relatively new, but this is the kind of thing too where this deck that you've had, Matt, for months versus decks you've had for years. Like, there is going to be more experimental cards in a deck like this than one that you've got 120 reps with over the course of 5 years and have made a ton of tweaks. This is exists in a much rawer state than some of the other decks, which is actually one of the reasons we wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. This deck, there are still many tweaks and many improvements that can be made. I'm not super in love with Undermountain Adventurer. I was kind of excited to play around with it. But initiative is that it's a mechanic that we've talked about a little bit too. It puts a lot into the game. It's hard to keep track of. And so I love Monarch. And Monarch, if it said that under Mountain Adventure, you became the Monarch instead of take the initiative, I wouldn't be considering taking it out because I love Monarch. It's such a great incentivizer. Initiative is a little more work, and I'm not super in love with that either. So yes, it's fantastic. Yes, the ceiling is incredibly high, but I also don't think it's really worth all that effort for the payoff that you're going to get.
Well, and that's a shame too, because under Mountain Adventure, 4 mana, 3/4 vigilance, you take the initiative, and it taps to add 2 green, or if you've completed a dungeon, you add 6 green. Like, every piece of that sounds amazing for this commander, because, I mean, it starts as a base 5/6 when your commander's in play that gives you mana and it attacks with vigilance. Like, all of that sounds really good, but yeah, like you mentioned on a previous show, you're optimizing this deck for your experience, not necessarily optimizing this deck for like getting every bit of value that you possibly can. So I totally get why that's the kind of card that isn't necessarily going to survive the cut, but it was fun to try out.
And for the most part too, this deck is fairly budget. I like having this deck around to play with folks that maybe don't have access to a lot of super expensive cards, or maybe they're newer to the game. So it's a learning tool too, because you get to, this is what happens when you have a mana ability. This is what a mana ability means. And I also don't want to overpower them with some deck. Like, you'll notice that obviously Doubling Season would be amazing in this deck. I don't have to tell you Doubling Season is amazing accidentally in every deck. But I don't have Doubling Season. I don't have Parallel Lives. I don't have a lot of those big money cards that I could have that obviously would be very, very powerful, but Doubling Season is worth almost the price of the rest of the deck.
Right. Yeah, the price on doubling, whenever I look at it, it's somehow gone up, and I'm more and more shocked than I was the previous time I saw it.
For real.
Yeah, it's so like I enjoy having this like relatively bulk pile of cards that there are a few, expensive cards. Forsaken Monument, it's $10 now. But for the most part, it's a fairly affordable, and the power level is kind of capped that way. It's not doing anything oppressive. It's just here's the thing. It's what we're doing. We're going to overrun you. And like eventually, if I'm winning because I'm casting 9 mana Eldrazi, that means I had to have the mana to get there. So the games went on. If I'm winning because Eldrazi Devastator, this 8/9 with trample and that's it, happened to win the game, like that's still a fun game because combat, you're going to get there eventually.
So I'm kind of curious, in the spirit of continuing to skewer your deck with the hard-hitting questions here, Matt, I'm kind of curious, like, what you perceive this deck's biggest weakness to be.
So sometimes it can just run out of steam. You play all these otherwise pretty bad cards that we've been talking about this whole time. Like you play Nest Invader, okay, that's not super exciting unless all the synergy's there. So if Raga Draga gets removed a couple times and he gets too hard to cast, I don't hit any overrun type of effects, you're kind of stuck with all this literal draft chaff of commons and uncommons that otherwise aren't very good at all. So yeah, if the synergy doesn't line up, it's just a pile of cards. It's literally this is what I had laying around type of deck. So yeah, if the synergy doesn't line up, it can be pretty brutal. I don't have a whole lot of board wipe recovery other than a couple good cards. But yeah, so it can run out of steam pretty quick. I do kind of lean into needing some sort of engine to keep the party going, but that's a lot of decks. But specifically with any synergy heavy deck, if the synergy isn't there, the cards just aren't doing a whole lot.
See, that's actually kind of interesting to me, because looking over this list and comparing it to what I see in the average deck data for Raga Draga, like, again, what we see there in the average deck is that it's very elf ball, which also kind of has that reputation of also having that stumbling block. Like if a Wrath happens in an Elf Ball deck, kind of gets shut down completely because so much of the Elf strategy is about putting it, just dumping your entire hand into play. And if it gets, you know, answered, if someone wipes the board, then you've got no more cards left in your hand. All your stuff is dead and it's hard to rebuild from there. And this actually looks to me like the type of deck that might be more resilient to those types of stopgaps. It feels like it would recover a little bit better because so many of your things make tokens and you don't need to actually play too many cards to create a whole bunch of bodies. But you still have the same issue of potentially running out of steam. Is that because of board wipes, or is it because of the engines not lining up, or is that kind of a mix of all?
Some kind of a mix of all of those. You'll notice in my recursion, I have regrowth, I have retrieve, which was an uncommon from the 7th or 8th time we went to Innistrad, but also split the spoils, which is kind of a factor fiction for your graveyard. So I prioritize needing some of those big important cards to the deck, and so if they get removed, I want to try to get them back. That's a big part of what I'm trying to do. So if I run out of steam and I need to get an Emrakul's Hatcher back, I'm able to do that and start to fill the board up again. That is one thing that I've kind of prioritized in there. But yeah, board wipes, and honestly, I didn't build it with a whole lot of answers in the deck either. There's a few there. It's always super satisfying countering something otherwise game ending with a warping whale. Dana, you can back me up on this.
Yes.
Oh.
But nobody ever expects warping whale, and so that's another fantastic moment.
Well, and especially in this deck, you know, warping whale only hits sorceries in terms of the counter ability on it, which is the thing this deck might well be most like concerned about, because board wipes are almost always sorcery speed. It's like you have basically counter target board wipe as a counter spell that you're running in a deck that doesn't have blue. Like that's very, very powerful in this kind of deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And nobody ever expects it too. I mean, granted, I'm playing Gruul, so Red Elemental Blast is always probably kind of in the back of people's minds, especially if you're Sheldon Menery, because Joey loves getting Sheldon with that card. But Warping Whale is just another gotcha type of card. I have 3 instants in the deck. So this deck very much operates at sorcery speed. I don't have a whole lot of opportunities to have those gotcha moments. So what little I do, it has to be fairly high impact.
I do want to quick point out the amazing sentence that Matt said a minute or so ago. If I really need to get that Emrakul's Hatcher back, which is probably not a thing very many players have ever thought or said, but
absolutely not.
Seriousness, and that's amazing.
But I mean, that's just how the deck operates. If I can make 4 bodies, fantastic. That's what I need to do. And so, like I said, if the synergy doesn't play out the way I need it, if it's not there, the deck is very, very good at turtling up. I'm going to make a whole bunch of 0/1 chump blockers and just buy myself time. So unless somebody has some sort of overrun or trample type of effect or just evasion, I can turtle up pretty well, because even if I'm drawing, you know, whatever Scion Maker, I mean, that's still going to be 3-4 bodies typically, which is going to give me time to kind of do my thing.
Yeah, I think, honestly, like, it's been fun to just kind of gush about this deck. Like, for me, like, because I honestly just think it's a just so dang funny that, like, a 0/1 token might actually be my downfall. Like, that just is an absolute
it might actually be a 4/5 beating you down. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Like, that is genuinely hysterical to me. But I think one of the things that I enjoy most that, like, I'm taking away from your deck list is, like, the priority that you've placed on this deck list is kind of, like you said, those gotcha kind of moments with something a little bit silly, like the Warping Whale or like the Red Elemental Blast. Like, you've taken an experience that someone definitely didn't expect. And I wonder if, like, you know, you mentioned that there are certain, like, stumbles that can happen to it, that it might run out of steam, and you haven't prioritized the optimization, the tuning to make sure that this is the most well-oiled engine that can possibly ever be a well-oiled engine. You've gone instead for a build that is going to most hopefully cause people in the game that you're playing to go, wait, what is that? What does that do? Like, yes. That is the way that it feels that you've built this. And that to me is my biggest takeaway, because I tend to get really caught up in building a deck where this is the most perfect engine that ever engined. Like, if we talk about my Babala Saga deck, like, that has been hyper scrutinized to a T. You know, I am meticulous with how many enchantments, how many artifacts, how many creatures, what is my mana curve? Whereas you are just like, my priority here is joy. I need to see other people smile. And I think that's a fantastic takeaway that makes your deck the most different for me. Yeah,
this deck is definitely optimized on the axis of, I want to have a fun social oh my gosh, what the heck's going on type of moments. But also too, just a deck that's optimized for my own play experience, a deck that it's doing things that I like to do. It's making something small, making a bunch of these small things, and then making them huge and running people over with them. That it's just, those are the types of things I love doing. I love feeling feelings. And like, of course, it's green, so I have to have Rishkar's expertise, even though... So Rishkar's expertise, Dana, I know you're going to make fun of me for trying to downplay Rishkar's expertise because it's such a high ceiling card, but the best thing that I've ever cheated into play, I think, was a Viridian Joiner, because all the spells that I want to cheat into play for free or cast for free with Rishkar's expertise, they all cost like 9 mana. So I don't get to do anything super cool, but it's like, okay, like I got an Eyeless Watcher. Wow.
Yeah, that is kind of the challenge sometimes, because I have Rishkar's expertise as well in my Cyan and Spawn deck. And yes, it feels a little underwhelming when the thing you put into play costs 3 mana.
Yeah, and that's the deck has a lot on the short side and a lot on the big side. So yeah, I love Rishkar's expertise. I'm not going to not put it into a monsters deck.
Right.
But it's also just like, oh, dang, like I kind of, you didn't whiff, but you didn't get a whole lot of value for it. But also, so we talked a while before, and one of the sacred rules that I absolutely would hate to come to Commander is sideboards. But I'm still playing Spawn Sire of Ulamog.
Oh,
I know that sideboards don't exist, and so the second ability where you can pay 20 mana and cast any number of Eldrazi cards you own from outside the game without paying their mana cost. I don't care about that ability. I don't want sideboards in Commander. But if I can pay 4 mana to make 2 bodies, that is perfect for this deck. I don't think I've ever attacked with Spawn Sire of Ulamog. I just want to make an army, and that makes a lot of armies.
Oh, yeah. Like, that's a card that you really just don't get to see. And so you found, yet again, a way for people to be like, wait, you're playing what now?
Yeah.
Like, and that's that's just optimizing.
You're playing Spawn Sire of Ulamog and you don't have your binder with you to cheat all these Emrakul's into play? No, get out of here. I just want to make 0/1s.
I'm playing a Spawn Sire of Ulamog that really doesn't require a Rule 0 conversation. I'm not planning on doing anything from outside the game.
Right.
I do not want any accommodations for this card. I just want to make my little buddies. That's all I want to do.
I think that's a fantastic pet card thing there. Although I can't help but notice that you seem to be playing some very pesky pet cards. Soul Guide Lantern and Relic of, I want to say Progenitus, something like
Progenitus.
that. Progenitus. Yeah, I've never heard of these cards before. You should probably just toss them. They might be your pet cards, but I think they're probably just...
There's just enough utility in those types of cards. I can maybe stick around get some graveyard hate, because I don't do anything with graveyards. I'm whatever. But being able to just cantrip out, sometimes it's valuable in a card or in a deck that if it runs out of steam, just cantrip out and you're good to go. They're fine cards. Relic of Progenitus, it's weird seeing it be $5 because I remember when it was like a nickel.
Yeah.
So
Right.
I just boomered myself right there, but it happens from time to time.
Well, I know we're not doing a deck tech, and we're not. But there's one card I want to suggest to you for this deck, Matt.
Okay.
Kindred Summons.
Yes.
So Kindred Summons.
Okay.
5 green. Choose a creature type and reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards with the chosen type, where X is the number of creatures you control of that type, and those cards come directly into play. So almost everything in this deck, including your Spawns and Scions, are an Eldrazi.
Oh no!
So you're
Yep.
gonna, at least in my version of this deck, when I cast that, I regularly put like 8 to 10 creatures in play, most of which then make multiple Spawns and Scions.
That they do.
Off of them coming into play as well.
That they do.
So I actually, of that whole cycle, Kindred Discovery might be one of the weaker ones, or Kindred Summons, excuse me, might be one of the weaker ones, but not in this deck.
Not in this deck. No.
It's really, really good when you start putting in, 4, 5 Eldrazi's that also bring in 3 or 4 or 5 spawns with them.
It's even a 7-mana spell to trigger.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Yeah,
Exactly.
it triggers Raga Draga. You get to untap stuff, and one thing too that we haven't mentioned yet, not to change the subject on you. Raga Draga giving all of your creatures with mana abilities pseudo vigilance is wildly underrated.
Yes.
That's one thing that we did kind of glommed over real quick, but it is super, super relevant that not only are you attacking with these 5/5s and 4/5s and whatever, but you get to untap with them, and then you have them as blockers too. That's such an amazing ability. So yes, but back to your point, Dana, Kindred Summons, yes, it does trigger Raga Draga, but if you even if you're just getting like 4 or 5 creatures off of this, it still is fantastic value.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Dana, I'm afraid.
I'm not. I'm excited.
Yeah. Well, and I, looking over, as we're making suggestions, I'll try and make a sincere one that isn't just take out your Relic of Progenitus. I do, if you're running out of steam, like you said, I feel like there's still plenty more room for the green's excellent, or even red's excellent versions of card advantage that could still be explored even further with this deck. And if that's the issue that you're running into, I feel like even more of those fantastic green spells are going to serve you even more. They just might look different than the stuff that you're used to. Like, Rishkar's Expertise is one of your favorite cards ever, but you're used to playing it in decks that routinely have like 12 power creatures in play, and here you're playing with a lot of creatures that are a lot smaller. So I think it just, will take a different look at the green draw available to you. You might even prefer red's impulse draw, the reckless impulses and all of that stuff instead for this type of deck, to help you with the recovery and make that engine more engine-y, I guess, a little bit. Not to like optimize and super tune the deck, but if you are running out of steam, I don't want you to run out of steam. I want you to crush people with your amazing Eldrazi.
Well, thank you.
Even if by people I mean me. So if we're offering the advices, I think that exploring different types of card draw than the stuff that you might be most used to is probably a good lesson to take away too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's cards too, like a lot of the draw engines in the deck, they're not really engines, they're just one-shot adrenaline boost to the deck. You have your Harmonize, your Rishkar's Expertise, but Shamanic Revelation is super powerful. You only have one copy in the deck, and so finding ways to kind of to maximize your opportunities to get stuff like that, that's where the deck does struggle a little bit. And so yeah, diversifying the portfolio, as they say, definitely something that I probably should do at some point.
Well, and it's hard because a lot of the custom stuff that you would want to go to would be like Return to the Wild Speaker, but Raga Draga is a human. It's a boar, but also a human. So like some of the go-tos are not necessarily there. So it might be worth exploring maybe a little bit more into Red's Impulse Draw, especially because that will help you keep more budget. Because like even Guardian Project is going to be like, what, $11 or something like that. So yeah, I think that this is a good lesson not to always take all of our baggage of like, oh, this is always a good card. Well, this is a new type of strategy, and it will have different needs as a result of that, even with some staple effects.
I would say, you say this is a very good card, but leave it to me to find a way to make a card bad, because it's not specific enough, and here we are.
Return to the Wild Speaker, no, but Spawnsire Vulamog, yes.
Yes.
That's where we're at with this deck, and that is not a thing you can say about many decks.
No.
And I'm glad that we got to explore why that is the case, and like, that's just, it just totally cracks me up.
It's a fun time. It's been a lot of fun brewing this deck. It was just kind of one of those knowledge checks of, okay, so how much do you know about the game? How can you apply this to your deck building process? And honestly, this Raga Draga, it's one of the reasons why I challenged myself to brew more decks, to go through this process again and have fun exploring and not just rely on pre-con commanders to kind of carry me into all my new decks. Is how can I take this adventure that I got to go on? And it was a lot of fun. But what else can I do with it? I want to look for opportunities to build decks like this that people say, oh my gosh, that's a different take. That's a lot of fun, but also it still is very, very powerful.
Matt got to talk about his favorite subject this week, which was him. But we'll be taking things in a different direction the next couple of weeks and talking about my favorite subject and Joey's favorite subject, which is me and Joey, respectively.
Also yourselves, yeah.
Yeah. So coming up next few weeks, we'll be doing the same thing with a deck from each of us to kind of try to give some insights into how we brew and why we make the choices we make in decks.
Yeah. That's so silly. And for the record, Dana, that isn't true. My favorite subject isn't me. My favorite subject is my graveyard.
That is fair. That is a fair point.
I thought you were going to say me. It was that I was also
my favorite subject is you.
Yes, I also like talking about you, Dana.
Yeah.
Oh Lord. Yeah, no, this was fun. It's cool to do a quick dive into what the deck is, what it says about the person who built it, the lessons that you can take away from that. And hopefully that's something that Dana and I can also share with y'all in the weeks that are yet to come. This will be a fun triplicate of episodes that we are looking forward to, getting a little bit more personal, but still showing what it is, why do we deviate from the data sometimes, and how can that be such a wonderful experience and how many things you can learn from it. So yeah, I am certainly looking forward to our favorite favorite subjects, Dana, whatever they may be. But yeah, Matt, thank you so much for putting your Gorguts boss up onto the pedestal for us to talk about, and I look forward to all of your Eldrazi stuff coming at a game night very soon.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, it's one of my favorite decks to play lately, and I'm sure if you tune into twitch.tv/EDHRECast, you will see it at some point.
Well, you know what? Speaking of different websites and things, Matt, we're going to call this episode to a close, but where can our listeners find us if they want to get in touch with us online?
So you can find me at the Twitters. That's at Mathimus55, MATHIMUS55. And don't forget, we are streaming twitch.tv/EDHRECast every Wednesday evening. We have guests on every single week. It's always a super fun time. So make sure you tune in for all of these awesome decks that we get to talk about now and more.
Hey, deja vu. And Dana, how about you?
You can find me on the Twitterboards at Dana Roach. You can hear me on my other podcast, CMDR Central, for a few more weeks at least. We just announced we're wrapping up that show here pretty soon.
Hey.
And congrats on that run, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. Episode 350 is coming up, and that will be our last one. We will, all good things come to an end, so we figured it was the time to kind of go gently into that good night. But I will still be here on this show, and I'm still writing articles for EDHREC and Commander's Herald.
And I'm Joey Schultz. You can find me at Joseph M. Schultz on the onlines, and you can find the cast at EDHRECast on the Facebooks or the Twitters, basically everywhere online. Look up EDHRECast, you'll find us. But if you've got a question for us, you can contact us at edhrecast@gmail.com. Once again, our thanks go out to Chase for assisting me with the post-production of the show. You can find them online at Mana Curves. And listeners, we'll be back at you next week with more data and fun insights. But until then, remember to EDHREC your deck before you wreck your deck.